I decided to test my family and told them, I have 2 weeks left to live. The truth was, I was hiding a $2.8 million inheritance. That same day, I overheard my son and his wife talking. And I panicked. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought I'd have to test my own family's love, but 2 years after burying my husband Randall, I found myself doing exactly that. Sitting in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, staring at the bank statement that showed $2.8 million, money my son Nolan and daughter-in-law Harlow had no idea existed. I made a decision that would change everything. I have 2 weeks to live. The words felt strange on my tongue as I practiced them in the empty house. Randall's chair across from me seemed to judge my choice, but I pushed the guilt aside. Something was wrong with my family, and I needed to know just how wrong before it was too late. The signs had been building for months. Nolan's visits became more frequent after the first anniversary of his father's death, but they felt different, calculated. He'd walk through the house with Harlow, their eyes lingering on antiques, on artwork, on anything that might have value. When they thought I wasn't listening, I'd catch fragments of conversations about when the time comes and what we'll do with all this stuff. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Grief makes you suspicious of everyone's motives. But then came the questions about my finances, disguised as concern for my well-being. Harlow, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and practiced smile, would pat my hand and ask if I needed help organizing my affairs. Nolan would mention how overwhelming it must be to manage everything alone. They never asked how I was feeling. They never asked if I missed their father. They asked about bank accounts and insurance policies. The final straw came 3 weeks ago. I was upstairs when I heard them in the living room, their voices carrying through the old house's thin walls. She's got to have more money than she's letting on, Harlow was saying. Look at this place. The antiques alone are worth a fortune. Dad always said he was careful with money, Nolan replied. There's probably a lot more than we think. Well, she can't live forever. She's already 68. The casual cruelty in her voice made my blood run cold. This wasn't grief or concern. This was calculation. They were waiting for me to die. That night, I sat in Randall's study, surrounded by his books and his smell that still lingered on his favorite sweater. I thought about the life insurance money he'd left me, the investments he'd made so carefully over 43 years of marriage. Money I'd barely touched because I couldn't bear to think about it, couldn't bear to acknowledge that it represented the end of our life together. Randall had been methodical about everything, especially our finances. He'd grown up poor, and the fear of poverty never left him. Even after his construction business took off, every dollar was accounted for, every investment researched. When he died, the lawyers presented me with papers showing assets I hadn't even known existed. Stocks, bonds, certificates of deposit, all in my name now. I'd told no one about the full extent of the inheritance, not even Nolan. I'd mentioned the life insurance, of course, and they knew about the house and the basic savings account. But the rest? The millions that represented Randall's lifetime of careful planning? That was my secret. And now I was glad I'd kept it that way. The plan formed slowly over the next few days. I researched online, reading medical websites about cancer symptoms and prognosis. I practiced the words I'd need to say, the devastated expression I'd need to wear. It felt wrong, lying about something so serious, but their casual discussion of my death felt worse. I called Dr. Morrison first, my physician for the last 15 years. I told him I needed to speak with him privately about a family matter. When I explained what I intended to do, he was quiet for a long moment. Sherry, I can't be part of this deception, he said finally. If they call me, they won't, I assured him. I'll tell them I'm seeing a specialist. You just need to not contradict me if they somehow find out. Another long pause. Why are you doing this? I told him about the conversations I'd overheard, about the way they looked at my belongings like they were already theirs. He listened without judgment, and when I finished, he sighed. 2 weeks? 2 weeks. Be careful, Sherry. These kinds of lies have a way of becoming real. I called Nolan that afternoon. My hands shook as I dialed his number, and I had to clear my throat twice before speaking. Honey, I need you and Harlow to come over this evening. There's something I need to tell you both. What's wrong, Mom? His voice carried that edge of annoyance it always had when I interrupted his schedule. Just come over, please. It's important. There was silence, then muffled conversation as he spoke to Harlow. We'll be there around 7. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I pulled out the tissue box, placed it strategically on the coffee table. I found an old medical pamphlet about cancer that Dr. Morrison had given me years ago when I'd had a benign lump. I messed up my hair slightly, made my eyes look tired. When they arrived at 7 sharp, I could see the impatience in their faces. Harlow checked her phone twice while taking off her coat, and Nolan barely kissed my cheek before settling into the armchair that used to be his father's. So what's this about, Mom? He asked, glancing at his watch. I took a shaky breath, surprised by how genuinely emotional I felt despite the deception. I got some test results back today. Their expressions changed instantly. Harlow's phone disappeared into her purse. Nolan leaned forward. What kind of test results? I've been feeling tired lately, more than usual, and there were some other symptoms. I let my voice trail off, watching their faces. The doctor ran some tests. The silence stretched between us. Outside, a car door slammed, and somewhere in the house, the old heating system clicked on. Mom, Nolan said softly, and for a moment, I heard the little boy he used to be. What did they find? I met his eyes, searching for love, for genuine concern. What I saw was fear, but I couldn't tell if it was fear for me or fear of something else entirely. It's cancer, I whispered. Pancreatic cancer. They say I have maybe 2 weeks. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, which, I supposed, they were meant to be. The first thing Harlow said wasn't, I'm sorry, or, we're here for you. It was, are you sure? Did they run all the tests? I watched her carefully, noting how her manicured fingers twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd observed before when she was calculating something. Nolan sat frozen in Randall's chair, his mouth slightly open, but his eyes were already distant, processing. Yes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Morrison referred me to an oncologist. They confirmed it yesterday. Yesterday? Nolan's voice cracked. Why didn't you call us immediately? I clutched the tissue in my hand, making my eyes water on cue. I needed time to process it myself, to figure out how to tell you. Harlow stood up abruptly and began pacing behind the couch. She was wearing those expensive heels she favored, the ones that clicked against the hardwood floors like a timer counting down. Click, click, click. What about treatment? She asked. Surely there are options. Clinical trials, different specialists. They said it's too advanced, I replied, watching her pace. It's already spread. They can make me comfortable, but what about a second opinion? Nolan interrupted, suddenly animated. Dad always said you should never accept the first diagnosis. Remember when he thought he had that heart condition, but it turned out to be acid reflux? The mention of Randall should have brought comfort, but the way Nolan said it felt hollow, like he was reading from a script of appropriate responses. I studied his face, looking for the grief I'd expected to see. Instead, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Calculation. I appreciate that, honey, but the tests are conclusive. Multiple doctors have confirmed it. Harlow stopped pacing and perched on the edge of the couch. Well, we need to think practically then. Her voice had taken on that crisp, efficient tone she used when planning dinner parties. Have you thought about arrangements? Arrangements? I repeated. You know, end-of-life planning. Making sure everything is in order for when... She gestured vaguely, unable to say the words. Nolan shot her a warning look, but she continued. I just mean, it's better to handle these things while you're still feeling up to it. The legal stuff, the financial planning. There it was, less than 10 minutes after learning their mother was supposedly dying, and they were already talking about money. I haven't really thought that far ahead, I lied. It's all so overwhelming. Of course it is, Harlow said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. That's why you have us. We can help you organize everything. Make sure nothing falls through the cracks. She exchanged a look with Nolan, and something passed between them. A silent communication I'd been watching for months, but had never fully understood until now. Maybe we should discuss some of this tomorrow, Nolan suggested. When you've had time to absorb everything, we could come over in the morning and start making lists. Lists? Of important documents, account numbers, that sort of thing, Harlow explained. Just so we know where everything is when the time comes. It would give you peace of mind knowing it's all organized. I wanted to laugh at the irony. They thought they were being subtle, but their eagerness was showing like a slip beneath a dress. 2 weeks to live, and they were already making inventory lists. I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet, I said. Harlow's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, you don't want to wait too long. These things can move quickly, and if you become incapacitated, it becomes much more complicated. The word hung in the air like a threat. Incapacitated. Unable to make decisions. Unable to protect myself from their plans. Harlow's right, Mom, Nolan said, reaching over to pat my hand. His touch felt cold, mechanical. It's just being responsible. Dad would want you to have everything in order. There was that casual invocation of Randall again, using his memory as leverage. It made me angry in a way that surprised me with its intensity. Your father and I already handled most of that, I said carefully. Everything important is in order, but we don't know where any of it is, Harlow pointed out. If something happens to you suddenly, we'd be completely lost. Bank accounts, insurance policies, investment statements. My pulse quickened. How did she know about investments? I'd never mentioned any investments beyond the basic savings account. What investment statements? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Nolan and Harlow exchanged another look. This time, panic flickered across his face. Well, I just assumed... Harlow backtracked. I mean, Dad was always so careful with money. It would make sense that there might be some investments. But I could see the lie in her eyes. They knew something. The question was how much. I excused myself to get some water, needing a moment to think. In the kitchen, I gripped the counter and tried to process what I'd just witnessed. Their concern wasn't for my suffering or their grief at losing me. It was pure, calculating interest in what I'd leave behind. When I returned to the living room, they were whispering urgently. They stopped the moment they saw me. Are you feeling all right? Nolan asked. You look pale. Just tired, I said. This has been a difficult day. Of course it has, Harlow cooed. Why don't we let you get some rest? We can talk more tomorrow. They gathered their coats with an efficiency that felt rehearsed. Harlow kissed my cheek, her perfume cloying and heavy. Try to get some sleep, and don't worry about anything else tonight. We'll take care of everything. After they left, I sat in the living room listening to their car pull out of the driveway. The house felt different now, charged with the electricity of deception from all sides. I wasn't the only one lying. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, passing the photos that lined the hallway. Nolan as a baby, as a little boy, graduating high school, his wedding day. In every picture he was smiling, but now those smiles looked different to me. Had I raised a son who could calculate profit margins while his mother faced death? Before going to bed, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened Randall's laptop, which I'd kept charged and ready even though I rarely used it. His password was still our anniversary date, and his email account was still active. I scrolled through old messages, looking for anything that might explain how Nolan and Harlow could know about investments they shouldn't know about. Then I found it, buried in a folder labeled Important Correspondence. An email exchange between Randall and our financial advisor from 6 months before he died. They were discussing the transfer of certain assets to ensure maximum benefit for survivors. At the bottom of one email, Randall had written, "Please send a copy of this to Nolan as well. I want him to understand the full scope of what Sherry will inherit." My hands trembled as I read the financial details outlined in the correspondence. Every investment, every account, every dollar of the $2.8 million inheritance was laid out in precise detail. And Nolan had received a copy. The betrayal cut deeper than any cancer could. Not only did my son know exactly what I was worth, but he'd known for over 2 years and had never mentioned it. He'd let me grieve alone, struggle with decisions alone, all while knowing he was sitting on information that could have helped me. But worse than the secrecy was what it revealed about his character. He'd known about the money, and instead of helping me or talking to me about it, he'd simply watched and waited, like a vulture circling roadkill. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my bedroom, Randall's side of the bed still untouched after all these months. For the first time since starting this terrible charade, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Maybe some truths were too painful to uncover. But as I thought about Harlow's cold efficiency and Nolan's calculated concern, I knew I had to see this through. If they were capable of this level of deception while I was supposedly dying, what were they capable of when I was actually gone? The test had only just begun, and already I didn't like what I was learning about the people I'd called family. They returned the next morning with reinforcements. I was still in my robe, deliberately looking frail and unprepared when the doorbell rang at 8:30. Through the peephole, I saw Nolan and Harlow flanked by a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. My stomach dropped. "Mom, this is Richard Brennan," Nolan said as they filed into my living room. "He's a friend of Harlow's family, an estate planning attorney." Richard Brennan looked like every lawyer in every movie, silver-haired, confident, with the kind of smile that probably cost a fortune in dental work. He extended his hand to me with practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm so sorry to hear about your diagnosis. Nolan and Harlow thought I might be able to help you navigate some of the legal complexities during this difficult time." I stared at them, genuinely shocked by their audacity. Less than 12 hours after learning I was supposedly dying, they'd assembled a legal team. "I appreciate the concern," I said slowly, "but I'm not sure I'm ready to think about legal matters just yet." "That's exactly why we need to act quickly," Harlow interjected, settling onto my couch like she owned it. "These things become much more complicated if we wait." Richard was kind enough to clear his morning schedule for us. Richard opened his briefcase with the efficiency of a surgeon. "I've taken the liberty of preparing some basic documents based on what Nolan and Harlow have told me about your situation. Nothing binding, of course, just frameworks we can discuss." He spread papers across my coffee table like he was dealing cards. Power of attorney forms, will templates, trust documents. The sight of them made my chest tight with genuine anxiety. "This seems awfully fast," I said. "Mrs. Coleman," Richard said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone lawyers use with elderly clients. "I understand this feels overwhelming, but with terminal diagnoses, especially with such a short timeline, we really can't afford to delay. The last thing you want is for your affairs to be settled by probate court instead of according to your wishes." Nolan leaned forward in his father's chair. "Richard explained that if we don't get these documents in place, the state could tie up your assets for months, even years. Your assets could be frozen," Harlow added. "Think about how that would affect everyone who depends on you. Everyone who depends on you." The phrase was carefully chosen. They were positioning themselves as dependents, as people who had a right to my money. "I didn't realize anyone depended on me financially," I said. Another exchange of glances between my son and daughter-in-law. They were doing that a lot lately, these silent conversations that excluded me entirely. "Well, we've been thinking," Harlow said carefully. "With everything that's happening, maybe it would make sense for us to move in here, to take care of you during your final weeks." "Move in? Temporarily," Nolan added quickly, "just to make sure you're not alone, and to help manage things as your condition progresses." Richard nodded approvingly. "That's very thoughtful, and it would make the transition much smoother when the time comes. Having family members already established in the household simplifies many legal aspects. The transition. They were talking about my death like it was a corporate merger. "I'm not sure that's necessary," I said. "I'm still feeling relatively well. But for how long?" Harlow's voice carried a note of impatience she quickly covered with concern. "The doctors said it could progress quickly. What if you fall? What if you can't get to the phone?" She was painting pictures of helplessness, of dependency, and I realized this wasn't just about money, it was about control. They wanted me isolated, vulnerable, and grateful for their presence. Richard pulled out another set of documents. These are medical power of attorney forms. They would allow Nolan to make healthcare decisions if you become unable to communicate your wishes. What kind of decisions? End-of-life care. Primarily, whether to pursue aggressive treatment, when to consider hospice care, those sorts of things. The implications sent a chill through me. They wanted legal authority over my medical care while I was supposedly dying of a disease I didn't have. I think I'd like to discuss this with my own lawyer first, I said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard's smile became strained. Of course, that's your right, he said, though I should mention that many attorneys aren't available on such short notice, and with your timeline, what my colleague means, Harlow interrupted smoothly, is that we're trying to help you avoid unnecessary stress. You're dealing with enough already. Nolan stood up and walked to the window, his back to us. Mom, I have to ask, are you sure you're comfortable with your current attorney? When's the last time you spoke with him? Mr. Patterson handles all my legal matters, I said. He's been our family lawyer for 20 years. But is he up to date on estate planning? Richard asked. The laws have changed significantly in recent years. You wouldn't want outdated advice to cost your beneficiaries thousands in unnecessary taxes. They were attacking on multiple fronts now. Urgency, complexity, and the suggestion that my longtime lawyer was incompetent. It was a coordinated assault, and I was beginning to understand just how much planning had gone into this morning's visit. I need some time to think about all this, I said, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. Richard gathered his papers with obvious reluctance. I understand your hesitation, Mrs. Coleman, but please don't wait too long. In my experience, families who delay these conversations often regret it later. As they prepared to leave, Harlow lingered by the mantelpiece, her eyes scanning the family photos and small valuables displayed there. Oh, I meant to ask, do you have a current inventory of your personal property? For insurance purposes? Insurance purposes? Well, if something were to happen to the house, or if items needed to be moved, she let the sentence hang. But the implication was clear. She was cataloging my belongings. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the scattered legal documents they'd conveniently forgotten to take with them. Each page was a window into their plans for my life and death, and none of it was about my comfort or well-being. I called Mr. Patterson immediately. Sherry! His familiar voice was warm with genuine concern. How are you holding up? I need to see you today. It's urgent. Of course, can you tell me what this is about? I hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. My family is pressuring me to sign legal documents. I need to understand what I'd be agreeing to. What kind of documents? Power of attorney, medical directives, will modifications. There was a long pause. Sherry, has something happened? Are you ill? It's complicated. Can you see me this afternoon? I'll make time. 2 o'clock? After hanging up, I examined the papers more carefully. Hidden in the legal language were provisions that would give Nolan and Harlow sweeping control over my finances and medical care. The power of attorney document was particularly troubling. It would allow them to sell my property, access my accounts, and make investment decisions on my behalf. But the most chilling discovery was a will template that left everything to Nolan, with Harlow named as alternate executor. It was already partially filled out, as if they'd expected me to simply sign it without reading. The phone rang, interrupting my analysis. It was Harlow. Hi, Sherry. I just wanted to check on you. You seemed a little overwhelmed this morning. I'm fine, I said, just processing everything. I know it's a lot. That's why Richard thought it might help to simplify things. Maybe we could focus on just 1 or 2 documents for now. She was trying to break down my resistance piece by piece, making smaller requests seem reasonable. Which documents? Well, the medical power of attorney seems like the most urgent, just in case something happens quickly. You'd want Nolan to be able to advocate for you with the doctors, wouldn't you? The manipulation was so smooth I almost admired it. She was using my supposed love for my son to trick me into signing away my autonomy. I'll think about it, I said. Of course. Oh, and I had another thought. Since we might be staying here more often to help out, would it be okay if we moved a few things into the guest room? Just basic necessities? They were moving in whether I agreed or not. Harlow, I haven't decided about the live-in arrangement yet. I know. I just want to be prepared. You know how I like to plan ahead. Her laugh was light, casual, but I could hear the steel underneath. After the call, I walked through my house seeing it with new eyes. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every small treasure Randall and I had collected over 4 decades of marriage. They were already dividing it up in their minds. I thought about the man I'd married, the way he'd worked so hard to build a secure life for our family. He'd trusted Nolan, loved him unconditionally. What would he think of the son he'd raised, the one who was now circling his widow like a predator? That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Randall died. I went down to the basement and opened his old safe, the one where he kept his most important papers. Inside, along with insurance policies and tax documents, I found something that made my blood run cold. A handwritten note from Nolan, dated just 3 months after his father's funeral. Dad, I know you can't read this, but I wanted you to know I'm going to take good care of Mom. She doesn't understand money the way you did, so I'll make sure everything is handled properly. I promise she'll never have to worry about anything. The paternalistic tone, the assumption that I was incapable of managing my own affairs, the promise to handle everything. It was all there in his own handwriting. This wasn't a recent development triggered by my fake diagnosis. This was a long-term plan that had been in motion since the day we buried Randall. I sat in the basement, holding my dead husband's papers and my son's promises, and I realized that my test had already revealed more than I'd bargained for. The question was no longer whether my family loved me. The question was whether they'd ever seen me as anything more than an obstacle between them and their inheritance. My meeting with Mr. Patterson confirmed my worst fears. "Sherry," he said, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed the documents I'd brought him, "these papers would essentially give your son complete control over your life. The medical power of attorney alone would allow him to refuse treatment, discontinue life support, or place you in a care facility against your will." We sat in his familiar office, surrounded by law books and the scent of old leather. I'd been coming here for 20 years, through home purchases, Randall's business dealings, and estate planning. Mr. Patterson had always been straight with me, never talking down to me the way Richard Brennan had. "But surely there are protections in place," I said. "Safeguards against abuse." He shook his head grimly. "In theory, yes. In practice, once these documents are signed, it becomes very difficult to revoke them if you're deemed mentally incompetent. And with a terminal diagnosis, they could argue I'm not thinking clearly." "Exactly." He set the papers aside and leaned back in his chair. "Sherry, I have to ask, are you actually ill? Because if you are, we need to discuss legitimate estate planning. And if you're not..." I told him everything. The overheard conversations, the sudden interest in my finances, the test I'd devised. He listened without judgment, occasionally taking notes on his yellow legal pad. "Good Lord," he said when I finished. "And you're certain about the inheritance amount? 2.8 million, give or take." Randall was very thorough in his planning. "And they know about it?" I told him about the email I'd found on Randall's computer. Mr. Patterson's expression grew darker. "So they've known for 2 years and never mentioned it. They've been planning this. It looks that way." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out his office window at the parking lot below. Finally, he turned back to me. "Sherry, I think you're in more danger than you realize. If they're willing to manipulate a dying woman, they might be willing to do other things to accelerate their timeline." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I'm not saying they would hurt you directly, but if they believe you're dying anyway, they might be less careful about your medications, your diet, your general care. Neglect can be just as deadly as active harm." The thought hadn't occurred to me, but now that he'd planted it, I couldn't shake it. What if they decided 2 weeks was too long to wait? What should I do? First, don't sign anything. Second, we need to protect your assets immediately. I'm going to recommend some trust arrangements that will make it much harder for anyone to access your money, even with power of attorney. We spent the next hour going over options. Irrevocable trusts, charitable foundations, even transferring assets to offshore accounts. Mr. Patterson was thorough, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "There's one more thing," he said as our meeting concluded. I think you should consider hiring a private investigator. A private investigator? To find out exactly what they've been planning, how long this has been going on, and whether anyone else is involved. Knowledge is power, Sherry. The more you know about their intentions, the better you can protect yourself. I left his office with a stack of legal documents to review and a business card for a private investigator named Marcus Webb. The afternoon felt surreal. An hour ago, I'd been a grieving widow playing a dangerous game with her family. Now, I was a woman under siege, planning a defense against my own son. When I got home, Nolan's car was in my driveway. I found him and Harlow in my kitchen, unpacking grocery bags. They'd let themselves in with the spare key I'd given them years ago, back when their visits were motivated by love instead of greed. "There you are," Harlow said brightly. "We were worried when you didn't answer your phone." I'd turned my phone off during the meeting with Mr. Patterson. I was running errands. "We brought you some groceries," Nolan said, not looking at me as he put items in my refrigerator. "Figured you might not feel up to shopping." I watched them move around my kitchen with the familiarity of ownership. Harlow had rearranged my spice rack to her liking. Nolan had moved my coffee maker to make room for an expensive juicer I'd never seen before. "We also thought we'd start moving a few things into the guest room," Harlow continued, "just in case you need us to stay over on short notice." "I told you I hadn't decided about that arrangement." "Mom," Nolan said, finally meeting my eyes, "we're not asking permission. We're telling you what's going to happen. You're sick, and we're going to take care of you whether you like it or not." The authoritarian tone shocked me. This wasn't the son I'd raised, the one who used to ask permission to have friends over or stay out past curfew. This was a man who felt entitled to make decisions about my life. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself right now," I said. "Are you?" Harlow asked. "Because you look exhausted, and you're getting confused about simple things." "What simple things?" "Well, you left the front door unlocked when you went out today, and yesterday you put the milk in the pantry instead of the refrigerator." Both statements were lies, but they were the kind of lies that would be impossible to disprove. Who keeps track of every door lock, every item put away? They were building a case for my incompetence, one small fabrication at a time. "I don't remember doing either of those things," I said. Harlow and Nolan exchanged one of their looks. "That's exactly what we're worried about," she said gently. "Memory issues are common with your condition. That's why it's so important to have help." They were gaslighting me, making me question my own perceptions and memory. It was a classic manipulation tactic, and it was working. For a moment, I actually wondered if I had left the door unlocked. "Speaking of help," Nolan said, "we've been thinking about bringing in some additional support. A home health aide, maybe a nurse." "I don't need a nurse." "Not yet," Harlow agreed. "But it would be good to have someone vetted and ready. Someone who understands your specific needs." I realized they were planning to surround me with their people, lawyers, healthcare workers, maybe even financial advisors. They wanted to create a circle of professionals who would validate their decisions and support their narrative of my incompetence. The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Dr. Morrison's office, confirming an appointment I'd scheduled for later in the week. "What appointment?" Nolan asked after I hung up. "Just a follow-up," I said vaguely. "We should probably come with you," Harlow suggested, "to help you remember what the doctor says." "I can remember what my doctor says." "Of course you can," she said with that patronizing smile. "But it's always good to have a second set of ears, especially for important medical information." They were closing in, tightening the circle of control. Soon I wouldn't be able to see my doctor alone, speak to my lawyer privately, or make any decisions without their input and approval. That evening, after they finally left, I called the private investigator Mr. Patterson had recommended. Marcus Webb had a gravelly voice and the kind of straightforward manner that inspired confidence. "Mrs. Coleman, your lawyer gave me some background, but I'd like to hear the situation in your own words." I told him about the fake diagnosis, about Nolan and Harlow's behavior, about my growing certainty that they were planning something more than just waiting for me to die naturally. "How long do you want to maintain the deception?" he asked. I told them 2 weeks. We're at day 3 now. That's not much time, but it might be enough to gather evidence of their intentions. I'll need access to their communications, phone records, emails, text messages. How can you get those? There are ways, legal ways, he added quickly, but I'll need your help. Can you get me into the house when they're not there? Maybe install some recording equipment? The idea of bugging my own home felt wrong. But then I thought about Harlow rearranging my kitchen, Nolan talking to me like I was a child, and the lawyer with his stack of papers designed to strip away my autonomy. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." "Good. I'll come by tomorrow morning after they leave. And Mrs. Coleman, be very careful what you eat or drink when they're around. If they're as desperate as you think they are, they might try to speed up your timeline." After hanging up, I went through my house room by room, looking for signs of their intrusion. In the guest room, I found they'd moved in more than just a few necessities. Harlow's expensive toiletries lined the bathroom counter. Nolan's clothes hung in the closet. They weren't preparing to help a dying woman. They were moving in permanently. In my bedroom, I noticed my jewelry box had been moved, just slightly, but enough that I could tell someone had been through it. My wedding ring set, some diamond earrings Randall had given me for our anniversary, a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother, all still there, but obviously catalogued. The most disturbing discovery came when I checked my medicine cabinet. I took a few prescription medications for blood pressure and cholesterol, nothing serious, but the bottles had been moved, and when I counted the pills, I realized some were missing. Not many, just a few from each bottle, but enough to suggest someone was experimenting with dosages, maybe figuring out what combinations might be dangerous for an elderly woman with a supposedly compromised immune system. I gathered all my medications and locked them in Randall's safe in the basement. If they were planning to poison me slowly, they'd have to find another way. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that my fake test had uncovered something far worse than greed or emotional manipulation. I wasn't just dealing with family members who wanted my money. I was dealing with people who might be willing to kill for it. Marcus Webb arrived at 9 o'clock the next morning, exactly 30 minutes after Nolan and Harlow left, for what they'd told me was a meeting with financial advisors about my situation. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were literally planning my financial future while lying to my face about where they were going. Marcus was exactly what I'd expected from his voice. Mid-50s, graying beard, and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen enough human ugliness to not be surprised by much. He carried a small black bag that looked like a doctor's kit. "Mrs. Coleman," he said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Thank you for trusting me with this situation. I know it can't be easy. Please call me Sherry. And no, it's not easy, but it's necessary." He nodded and got straight to business. "I've already started running background checks on your son and daughter-in-law. Preliminary results show some interesting financial patterns. But first, let's get you protected." Over the next hour, Marcus installed tiny recording devices in key locations throughout my house. One in the living room, hidden behind a picture frame. Another in the kitchen, tucked under the counter near where they usually sat. A third in the guest room they'd claimed as their own. "These are voice-activated," he explained. "They'll capture any conversation that happens when you're not in the room. The range is excellent, and the battery life is about 2 weeks. 2 weeks? That's perfect timing." He also gave me a small recording device to wear, disguised as a pendant. "Wear this whenever they're around. It'll capture everything they say to you or in your presence." The technology felt surreal, like something from a spy movie rather than a grandmother's desperate attempt to protect herself from her own family. But as Marcus explained how to activate and deactivate the devices, I felt a sense of control returning for the first time in days. "Now," he said, settling into my kitchen chair with a cup of coffee, "let me tell you what I've found so far." He pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "Your daughter-in-law Harlow has some interesting financial history. She's filed for bankruptcy twice in the past 10 years, both times right before marrying wealthy men." "Both times?" "She was married before your son, to a man named David Kellerman, who died in a car accident 2 years into their marriage, left her everything, about $400,000. She burned through that money in less than 18 months and filed for bankruptcy 6 months before she met Nolan. My stomach turned. Are you saying she targets widowers? I'm saying she has a pattern. Wealthy older men who are vulnerable, either through recent loss or isolation. She marries them, gains access to their assets, and then, he shrugged, things happen. What kind of things? David Kellerman's accident was ruled exactly that, an accident. But the circumstances were suspicious. He was an experienced driver. The road conditions were good, and there was no mechanical failure. He just drove off a cliff on a route he'd taken hundreds of times before. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted bitter. And the insurance? Paid out in full. Double indemnity clause for accidental death. I set my cup down with shaking hands. Are you telling me she killed her first husband? I'm telling you there are questions that were never answered, and now she's married to your son, who stands to inherit a substantial amount of money from his supposedly dying mother. The implication hung in the air between us like smoke. I thought about the missing pills from my medicine cabinet, about Harlow's insistence on preparing my meals, about their eagerness to move into my house and control my medical care. There's more, Marcus continued. Your son has been meeting with a financial advisor, but not about estate planning. He's been exploring high-risk investments and asking about liquidating large amounts of assets quickly. What kind of investments? The kind that lose money fast if you don't know what you're doing, or the kind that can hide money from authorities if you do know what you're doing. He showed me bank records that he'd somehow obtained. Nolan had taken out several large loans in the past year, using his expected inheritance as collateral. He owed money to 3 different lenders, and the interest rates suggested these weren't traditional banks. He's borrowed against money he doesn't have yet, Marcus explained. Money that depends on your death. If you don't die on schedule, he's going to be in serious trouble with some very serious people. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about greed or impatience. Nolan was financially desperate, and Harlow had experience making wealthy spouses disappear permanently. What do you recommend? I asked. First, we document everything. Every conversation, every manipulation, every threat. Second, we protect your assets completely. And third, he paused, studying my face. We give them enough rope to hang themselves. What do you mean? We let them think their plan is working. You continue the charade about being sick, but we gather evidence of their intentions. When we have enough proof, we spring the trap. It was risky, but I could see the logic. If I revealed the truth now, they'd just deny everything and disappear. But if we caught them in the act of trying to harm me or steal from me, we'd have enough evidence to put them away. How long do you think we need? A few more days should be enough. But Sherry, I need you to understand. This could get dangerous. If they suspect you're onto them, or if they decide to accelerate their timeline. I understand. He gathered his equipment and papers. I'll be monitoring the recordings remotely. If I hear anything that suggests immediate danger, I'll contact the police immediately. In the meantime, don't eat or drink anything they prepare. Don't take any medications they hand you, and don't be alone with them if you can help it. After Marcus left, I sat in my living room thinking about the woman my son had married. I'd always found Harlow a bit cold, a bit calculating, but I'd attributed that to generational differences. I'd never imagined she might be a predator who specialized in murdering husbands for money. And Nolan? My sweet little boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, who'd cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly. That boy had grown into a man capable of borrowing money against his mother's death. The phone rang, interrupting my dark thoughts. It was Harlow. Hi, Sherry. How are you feeling today? Tired, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Very tired. That's to be expected. Listen, Nolan and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to contact hospice care, just to have them evaluate your needs. My blood chilled. Hospice care meant morphine, meant powerful drugs that could easily mask a murder. It meant medical professionals who expected their patients to die and wouldn't question a sudden decline. I'm not ready for that yet, I said. I know it's scary, but they're not there to speed things up. They're there to make you comfortable, and they have protocols in place to make sure you're not in pain when she let the sentence trail off. When I die. Yes? It would give us all peace of mind knowing you're getting the best possible care. The recording device around my neck felt heavy against my chest. I hoped it was capturing the false concern in her voice, the way she was pushing me toward a situation where my death would be expected and unquestioned. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long. These things can progress quickly, and we want to be prepared." That afternoon, they returned with more supplies for their extended stay. I watched from my bedroom window as they unloaded suitcases, boxes of food, and what looked like medical equipment from their car. When they came inside, Harlow was carrying a pill organizer, one of those weekly dispensers with compartments for each day. "I thought this might help you keep track of your medications," she said, setting it on my kitchen counter. "It's so easy to get confused when you're not feeling well." "I manage my medications just fine." "Of course you do. This is just to make it easier. I can help you fill it each week." She wanted control over my pills. Combined with what Marcus had told me about her first husband's suspicious death, the implication was terrifying. "That's very thoughtful, but I prefer my current system." Nolan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mom, we need to talk about being more cooperative. We're trying to help you, and you're fighting us every step of the way." "I'm not fighting anything. I'm just not ready to give up my independence yet." "Your independence?" Harlow laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honey, you're dying. Independence isn't really an option anymore." The casual cruelty in her voice sent a chill through me. She was already talking about me like I was gone, like my opinions and preferences no longer mattered, because I wouldn't be around much longer to enforce them. That evening, they prepared dinner for me, a gesture that would have seemed loving if I hadn't known what I now knew. I ate the salad but claimed I was too nauseous for the main course, which Harlow had prepared separately in the kitchen while I was out of the room. "You need to eat to keep your strength up," she insisted. "I'm just not hungry." "But you'll waste away to nothing," Nolan said. Dad wouldn't want that. There it was again. The manipulation using Randall's memory. But this time, it made me angry instead of guilty. "Your father would want me to make my own decisions about my own body," I said firmly. They exchanged another one of their looks, and I saw frustration flash across Harlow's face. Their timeline was slipping, and they were getting impatient. After they went to bed in their room, I crept down to the basement and called Marcus from Randall's old workshop. "How are the recordings?" I whispered. "Damning," he said. "I've got them discussing your medication schedule, debating whether to contact your doctor about confusion and memory issues, and planning what they'll do with the house after you're gone. What about evidence of actual harm?" "Not yet, but they're getting bolder. Tomorrow I want you to agree to let Harlow organize your pills. We'll switch them out for placebos beforehand, but if she tries to give you something that could hurt you, we'll have her on tape doing it." It was a dangerous game, but we were running out of time. According to my fake timeline, I only had a few more days to live. And based on the increasing desperation I was seeing in Nolan and Harlow, I suspected they weren't planning to wait for nature to take its course. As I hung up the phone and crept back upstairs, I heard voices coming from the guest room. They were talking in low tones, but the recording device would catch every word. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was the one in control. They thought they were hunting a helpless old woman, but they were wrong. They were about to discover that this old woman had teeth. The end came sooner than any of us expected. It was day 11 of my supposed 2-week death sentence when Marcus called me at 6 in the morning, his voice tight with urgency. "Sherry, you need to get out of that house right now. Don't pack, don't explain, just leave." I was in the kitchen making coffee, still in my robe. Nolan and Harlow were supposedly still asleep upstairs. "What's wrong?" I intercepted a phone call between Harlow and someone she calls the doctor. "They're planning to give you something today that will cause a heart attack. She told him you've been declining rapidly and that it needs to look natural." My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Today? They're tired of waiting, and Nolan's creditors are apparently getting impatient. There's a window between 7 and 9 this morning when this doctor can come to the house without being seen. I looked at the clock. 6:15. I had less than an hour. What should I do? Leave now? Go somewhere public? A diner? A mall? Anywhere with witnesses and security cameras? I'm calling the police, but we need you safe first. I hung up and started toward the stairs to get dressed, but I heard footsteps above me. They were awake earlier than usual, which meant the timeline had moved up even further. Instead of going upstairs, I grabbed my purse and car keys from the kitchen counter and headed for the back door. I'd drive away in my nightgown if I had to. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard Harlow's voice behind me. "Going somewhere, Sherry?" I turned around slowly. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs, fully dressed despite the early hour. Her smile was different now, sharper, more predatory. The mask of concern had finally slipped completely. "I just wanted some fresh air," I said. "In your nightgown? With your car keys?" She stepped closer, and I noticed she was holding something in her right hand. A syringe. "I don't think so." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might actually give out without whatever poison she'd prepared. "Harlow, what are you doing?" "What I should have done days ago." She continued advancing, forcing me away from the door. "You're taking too long to die, Sherry. And frankly, we're tired of pretending to care. Where's Nolan?" "Getting ready to play the grieving son. He's actually pretty good at it. He's been practicing." The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This wasn't desperation or greed talking anymore. This was someone who enjoyed the power of holding life and death in her hands. "The doctor said this would be quick," she continued, raising the syringe. "It'll look like your heart just gave out. Very peaceful, very natural for someone in your condition." I backed against the kitchen counter, my mind racing. Marcus had said he was calling the police, but they wouldn't arrive in time. I needed to stall, to find a way to survive the next few minutes. "You killed your first husband too, didn't you?" I said. She laughed, genuinely amused. "David? Oh, that was much messier. I was young, inexperienced. I've gotten much better at this." "Why? Why kill people who trusted you?" "Because they were old and in the way." Her voice was matter of fact, like she was discussing the weather. "David was sweet, but he was never going to amount to much. And you? You're just a lonely old woman sitting on money she'll never use. At least with Nolan and me, it'll do some good." "What kind of good?" "We have plans, big plans. Your little inheritance is going to fund a much larger operation." The syringe was inches from my arm now. I could see the clear liquid inside it, could imagine it stopping my heart within minutes. But then I heard something that made both of us freeze. Sirens. Harlow's confidence flickered for just a moment, but then she steadied herself. "It doesn't matter. By the time they get in here, you'll be dead, and I'll be the grieving daughter-in-law who tried desperately to save you." She lunged forward with the syringe, but 43 years of marriage to a construction worker had taught me a thing or two about self-defense. I grabbed the coffee pot from the counter and swung it as hard as I could. The glass shattered against her wrist, and she screamed, dropping the syringe. Hot coffee splashed across both of us. But the pain seemed to enrage her rather than stop her. "You old bitch!" she snarled, coming at me with her uninjured hand. "I'll strangle you myself if I have to." But the sirens were getting louder, and suddenly my front door exploded inward. Police officers flooded into my kitchen, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Drop your hands! Get on the ground!" Harlow raised her hands, the fight going out of her as quickly as it had come. Blood dripped from her wrist onto my kitchen floor, mixing with the spilled coffee in a pattern that looked almost artistic. "Where's your son?" one of the officers asked me. "Upstairs," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He's upstairs getting ready to play the grieving son." They found Nolan in the guest room, dressed in a black suit and practicing his devastated expression in the mirror. He didn't resist when they arrested him, just kept saying, "I don't know what you're talking about," over and over like a broken record. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, followed by Mr. Patterson and, surprisingly, Dr. Morrison. "Are you hurt?" Dr. Morrison asked, examining the coffee burns on my arms. "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine, actually. For the first time in 11 days, I'm not dying." The irony made me laugh, a sound that bordered on hysteria. I'd spent nearly 2 weeks pretending to die, and I'd almost been murdered for my trouble. Over the next few hours, as police processed the scene and took my statement, The full scope of Nolan and Harlow's plan became clear. They'd recruited a disgraced doctor who'd lost his license for insurance fraud to help stage my natural death. The syringe contained a combination of drugs that would have induced cardiac arrest while leaving minimal traces in an autopsy. More disturbing was the evidence Marcus had gathered from the recordings. Harlow and Nolan had been planning this for months, waiting for the right opportunity. My fake illness had simply accelerated their timeline. The borrowed money was the catalyst, Marcus explained as we sat in my living room, now decorated with police tape and evidence markers. Nolan owed over $300,000 to some very dangerous people. They were threatening to hurt his family if he didn't pay up soon, so he was willing to kill his mother to save his own skin. It appears that way. I thought about the little boy who used to bring me flowers he'd picked from the neighbor's garden, who'd cried when I was sick with the flu because he was afraid I might die. That child had grown into a man who would inject poison into my veins to solve his financial problems. What happens now? I asked. They'll be charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and probably a dozen other things, Marcus said. Harlow will likely be investigated for her first husband's death as well. And the money? Mr. Patterson leaned forward in his chair. That's up to you, Sherry. You could still leave it to Nolan if you wanted to. Blood is blood, after all. I thought about that for a long moment. About forgiveness and family loyalty and the bonds that were supposed to hold people together. Then I thought about the syringe, about Harlow's casual cruelty, about Nolan practicing his grief in the mirror. No, I said finally. Blood isn't blood when it's poisoned. 3 months later, I stood in the offices of the Sherry Coleman Memorial Foundation, watching volunteers sort donations for local charities. The $2.8 million inheritance had been transformed into something that would help people instead of funding the lifestyle of murderers. I kept enough money to live comfortably, to travel a little, maybe to see some of the places Randall and I had always talked about visiting. But the rest was going to causes he would have supported. Programs for at-risk youth, scholarships for children from poor families, support for small businesses like the one he'd built from nothing. The foundation director, a earnest young woman named Sarah, showed me a letter from a teenager whose college tuition we'd funded. She says she's going to study construction management, Sarah said with a smile. She wants to build houses for families who can't afford them. It was exactly what Randall would have wanted. Our money helping someone build something good instead of being used to destroy lives. I still lived in the same house, but I'd had the locks changed and the guest room converted into a library. Sometimes I missed the illusion of family, missed believing that Nolan loved me, but I didn't miss the fear, the constant vigilance, the weight of wondering when they would finally show their true faces. The trial was set for next month. Nolan had taken a plea deal, but Harlow was fighting the charges. Her lawyer was arguing that she was just a devoted wife trying to help her husband through a difficult time. I would testify, of course. I would tell the jury about the syringe, about her casual admission of murdering her first husband, about the way she'd smiled while planning to inject poison into my veins. But mostly, I would tell them about the test I'd devised and how it had revealed that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones most willing to destroy you. And I would tell them how I'd learned that survival sometimes means accepting that family isn't about blood. It's about who genuinely cares whether you live or die. On quiet evenings, I would sit in Randall's chair and think about the choice I'd made to lie about dying. It had cost me the last illusions I had about my son, but it had saved my life. More than that, it had given me back my freedom. I was 70 years old, wealthy, and finally, completely alone. And for the first time in 2 years, that felt like a gift instead of a burden. The test was over. I had my answer, and I was still alive to do something about it. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.